Hello, this is John Jughead Pearson at 12:30 midnight a.m. in Osaka, Japan. These YouTube videos about these albums just don't get any easier, it seems, especially about the Weasel days, where I have less to say about the lyrics and more I want to say about touring and about the inner band works. And also and also was many years ago. So I've had to rely on a couple of other people to fill in some blanks for me, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other mistakes here and there that I would like to open up the comments section on these YouTube videos. Um, I also make corrections in the comments too, so it's good to look at those. And also, if people find things uh, in the episode that they think might not be an actual fact or out of sequence, or if you have ideas for further ones, please write them into the comments below the video. Now we are tackling tonight Wiggle. Wiggle, which was, it says here on the wiki, Wiggle is the fifth studio album by the Chicago-based punk rock band Screeching Weasel. That is correct, that is us. Initially planned for release in November 1992. The album was finally released on CD, vinyl, and cassette in January 1993 through Lookout Records. We'll go a little bit into why that took so long. I have notes here tonight from Master Genie, who was the producer and engineer, and I have notes from Gub Scott Conway, who went on tour with us, sort of took over for bass between David Naked, and then when Joanie Personality came in. Um, and also, I have a few notes that are from Johnny Personality himself, and I incorporated some background dates that I got from B-Face just tonight. B-Face from the Queers and Groovy Ghoulies and the Mopes. So they helped me out a little bit on this one. I also want to thank Craig Dunkel from the band The Lebowskis. He's actually been giving me since I'm in Japan, I don't actually have I don't have the records with me, so he's been sort of putting them in a Dropbox for me, so I wanted to thank him on this one. I also want to say that Ben has done extensive writings about all these records and about the band through the years, through his zines and through liner notes in the record. So I always I would like to say to refer to all of those for some really great reads and some pretty specific date and timeline stuff, because he's very good at that. Also, you can still try to get copies of his book. Uh, oh, I just forgot the name of it. Not Like Hell, the other one I put out. Uh, well, now I'm gonna have to look it up. Ben Weasel Books. Can't believe I forgot the name of it. Punk is a four-letter word. Yes, you can probably still get some of those. It's a book of essays and has a lot of great stories about being on tour, and also about, I think it has the beer one I was talking about, or his favorite beers. I don't know all the art. It's been a long time since I've looked at that book, but it's got a lot of great material in it. So there's that. Quickly about the record cover. It's in the same vein as like My Brain Hurts, where it's sort of this take on the 50s, uh, sort of on the cover where everything looks copacetic and the families are happy and everyone is going to their jobs, but on the inside everyone's sort of dying on the inside, like the idea of My Brain Hurts. So the idea of the guy strapped to the dynamite sort of gives that idea. And also the phrase wiggle of, wiggle room, give me some wiggle room. Also, as I said on the last podcast, the band was going to be called Wiggle, but Larry Livermore from Lookout Records, who is going to put out My Brain Hurts, said that why change the name when you have a name that's doing pretty well already? So with some hesitation and some pushing, we agreed to that. But on the back of Ben's brain burner, he always had the idea of doing something with the title Wiggle. So it appeared as a record 2 records later. This one says it's the fifth studio album, and I had forgotten about the Ramones record, but it turns out that we actually recorded the Wiggle before the Ramones, but then we went in and recorded the Ramones, and it actually got put out before Wiggle because of trouble we were having with getting Wiggle mixed the way that we were happy with. The Ramones thing happened when we were actually, I think someone had said, I always remember we were at Joe Vindictive's, and he actually told me that we were all there silk screening shirts. I don't know which one, a little later one. I think one with the woman saying something. I can't remember the exact one, but we screened some at his house. And he said that we all got the call from Todd at Selfless to do Ramones records. And I remember we all had a good laugh at that and thought it was a ridiculous idea, and that's kind of why we decided to do it, because we thought it would be kind of ridiculous. I don't know if I'm going to do that record, so I'll just say shortly that Ben and I's idea was, it wasn't our favorite Ramones record, but we thought we could do it pretty perfectly with the bass in one speaker and the guitar in the other. And the idea was to do it as exactly as possible as we could, except for two tracks. We wanted to be slightly different to sort of give our flair. 53rd and 3rd was one of them, and I can't remember the other one, but there's only two really variations or changing from the record on that album to sort of show more where we come from as Screeching Weasel. So that's that. The other thing I wanted to say, leading up to this, Lookout had put out Boogada 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 and My Brain Hurts, and our royalties went up a lot, so we started doing pretty well. And I worked at Crown Books at the time. I was living downtown in Logan Square, but I was coming back into the suburbs to work at Crown Books. And I remember, the money started coming in pretty well, and it wasn't a lot. I lived really cheaply, so I didn't need a lot. But I was at work, and we had a new boss come in who didn't know anything about books. We had a great bookstore where everyone really knew about novels and literature and books, and it was really exciting to work there. And then my friend Peter sort of had a breakdown and left. I write a lot about Peter later, and even in Blackouts. And then they brought in this other manager and assistant manager. They got rid of both of them, and they didn't know anything about books. Actually the assistant manager wanted to work at Foot Locker instead, which I have nothing against the selling of shoes for feet, but he knew nothing about books. Somebody called once for a book, and he looked at me and said, "Do you know where?" I looked all over the children's section. I can't find this book, Don the Coyote, and I was like, "Oh, you mean Don Quixote? The classic first novel ever written." And I don't expect anyone to know that, but if you're, assistant manager at a bookstore, I think you should know that. The other thing that happened is why I'm telling this story is they started making us wear these blue, like we were chefs or something, these blue aprons. And I never put one on, and I just kept on putting it off and putting it off until one day they said, "John, you have to wear the blue apron." And then I said, "Well, John doesn't have to work here anymore." And then that was my last day. So I walked out because I realized I didn't really need the job anymore. I was making enough on the royalties to survive. And then that left me more time to concentrate on touring and booking the tours. And also I was going to college at the time at Columbia College for literature and theater. What I also want to say before digging into the tracks of this record is the Vapid and Ben team. This is where, My Brain Hurts was mostly pretty much Ben created a lot of the stuff in a vacuum and then added a lot of Vapid stuff onto it once we started rehearsing. So the Vapidisms in there sort of creeped in, except for a couple of songs like Guest List that he actually wrote the solo to and things like that. But the sort of Vapid Ben team sort of creeped in more so after that. Once we started rehearsing in my basement and touring more, and Vapid started adding more vocals, and the two of them would always joke around on tour and always go away with their guitars. And I remember waking up plenty of times in these punk houses, and Vapid would be out playing his guitar. It used to annoy all of us because he used to get up really early and just start playing, just playing wherever he was. He just had no idea that he was, keeping other people up. But then eventually Ben would join him, and the two of them were creating new stuff, different harmonies and backing vocals on tour. So that team became more the focus of the writing team, and I became more of what I call sort of the businessman of the band, where I sort of took care of us on the road and arranged rehearsals and did all the accounting and stuff like that. Ben did most of the like lawyer work with contracts. But then I would take those and deal with them and distribute royalties throughout the whole time of the band. Um, but the other thing I want to say that I concentrated on, and listening to this, to Wiggle over again, I had a bit more of pride of myself as a guitar player, because back then and even over the years, it had even been said that I was sort of probably the lesser musician in the band. Maybe me and Ben were like equal in our guitar playing. Um, but as I go back and listen to this, I knew that I just couldn't do the solos the way that those two could do. That Vapid could just do better than me in most cases. Um, so I started really concentrating on the rhythm, and and I got criticized years later of being like not even the rhythm being very good on those records. But I went back and listened to it, and now that I know a lot more about music, and after having been in Even in Blackouts and experiencing being just rhythm, that whole band was about keeping in rhythm. I listen to mine, and I'm pretty sure that I'm usually the one that's pretty on track with the rhythm. The thing about me that got in the way, but also I think was cool, is that I wanted every single strum heard. So I often would play too hard, and maybe that made me fall behind, or was ahead. But it still had that energy of what Ben and I used to talk about playing beyond your own capacity. So what if you want to go back and listen to them? I think I'm usually on the left side. I think I'm on the left side on the Wiggle album. Um, you can hear all of my rhythms. You can hear all the hitting of the strings, and I guess that just really became my sort of passion, is trying to get that down, because I just wanted to be better at rhythm guitar in general, because that's what I liked doing in the band anyway. It allowed me to jump around more, and I enjoyed it. It's like being the foundation of the band. I think both in the business way I ran it and in the music, that's what I wanted to be. I knew who was the leader. I knew who was the leader. Ben was the leader. That was very easily seen. Very close to the beginning. So I wanted to support that more. So I became more of the rhythm guy. Um, so that's enough about that. I'm going to jump into the record. First, I want to start with Gub. So Gub Scott Conway, after Dave Lally left the band, I think we might have actually kicked him out. It says in the liner in this thing on Wiki that Vapid wanted him out, but then there's like a number two on that, like it's not confirmed. I never heard that from Vapid. It might be true, but I don't know. I can't say. Um, but we needed to tour, so we brought in Gub Scott Conway, who was in Ivy League with Panic and with Bob Fogerty, who you learned about on the last Boogada podcast. Um, and years and years and years and years later, he would end up being my guitarist for Even in Blackouts. But at the time, he was just this really cool, really hyper guy that when you would talk, he would repeat the last words of your sentence. It was kind of annoying, but he was just a charming, really likable guy. And he took on the bass for the touring from, I think, right after My Brain Hurts came out and up until Wiggle was recorded. So he went on these two pretty crucial tours, back-to-back tours that I have his notes from, and then I'll launch into the songs from there. So Gub's first note was, because I asked him about the tours and what he remembers, and he says, "I believe we went east for the first 2 weeks, came back for a break, and then went south. I believe we started the tour around Christmas because we played Joe's house with the Queers on New Year's Eve. Memorable events that evening, there was a guy huffing butane trying to fight everyone. I remember he came towards me and just dropped to the floor. I've talked about this guy too. It was a strange party. Meeting Joe Queer was really cool because this is the first time we had met all the B-Face and Joe Queer. And they had a big party this night and the show, and there was just so many crazy kids there. And this one kid, like we said, was just huffing butane, and we found him in the closet at one point of the night. It was a crazy night. Then B-Face says, I've hit B-Face's comment in right here. We met you guys at a toll booth off of I-95. I recall this because Gub was driving your van and he was the first person I saw from SW, oddly. We then went to Joe's house. The restaurant was likely later that same night or the next day. I remember first meeting Joe in his restaurant, but actually, as B-Face says here, we went there later. But Joe Queer had owned a restaurant that time called Joe's Place. I still have the actual, not the menu, but the plate holder type thing, what is it called? The mat, the food mat. Um, so then Gub goes on to say, oh no, this is B-Face. The second meeting was when we went out to Chicago and played McGregor's with you and the Vindictives. Uh, and that's, I mentioned because that's when we hired Johnny Personality to be on bass. One thing I remember I'll bring up about meeting Joe here is he had his guitar. He was walking around his house playing guitar after the show, and he was just making up songs as he went along. That's what I remember most about Joe all the time is his just ability to just say a phrase and all of a sudden just put some music under it. So he was constantly just coming up with these phrases. And I think that night is actually where he came up with Ursula Finally Has Tits, because I remember him wandering around his living room singing that. It was pretty funny. Now let's go to the first track on Wiggle, which is Hanging Around. I had said before that we started songs that have a bang at first, but then instead of the best songs on the album. This one didn't have a bang at first, but it still has that same idea where it's not one of the best songs, but it has a really, I think, a powerful energy to it. Um, Also, it says it was written by all of us, but really the bulk of the song itself was written by Ben. What was created by all of us was actually the beginning part, the instrumental part. In those days, we were rehearsing in my basement in my house in Logan Square, and Ben was also having just a difficult time in his life during this period. I think he was moving around, didn't quite know what was going on with his relationship with Portia. And he even says it in notes that he was just having a really difficult time. Um, but the band was the best I think the band had ever been by that time when we brought in Johnny Personality to start rehearsing. So I'm going to be going back and forth between Gub Memories and Johnny Personality, who was actually recording the bass part. Um, but we used to start before Ben got there playing. Maybe over stuff. We would go over stuff that we learned from the day before. And then when Ben got fed up and left, we would continue playing. So this is one of the times where I think we just played the most together, like with sometimes with no purpose. We just really enjoyed playing together. Personality was an amazing bass player, can play any instrument. I mean, you can tell from the Vindictives records, he's amazing. And Panic and Vapid and me, we just really enjoy being together. So we started creating these instrumental parts that were attached to songs in different ways. And this one was inspired by a Cheap Trick. We were all fans of the band Cheap Trick, and they have some great sort of instrumental parts and building really simple solos with great melodies over them. And we used to cover the song "Hello There." So I think we were very heavily influenced by Cheap Trick at that time, and I remember specifically this one being that influenced by Cheap Trick. The one string notes into the chords. Pretty strong beginning, I think. I still really, really like that instrumental beginning for that song, Hanging Around. I'm going to say once more here that you probably know this if you've listened to all these podcasts or these YouTubes, but I'm not going to explore lyrics much. I wasn't writing the lyrics and I don't want to talk about them. I'm just using the songs as jumping boards for talking about other things around the song, maybe the recording of it. So the second one in that line on that record is I'm Not in Love. This is the type of song that we think might lead off the record. It has that feel that I was talking about where it just jumps at you right away. Uh, okay. Yeah, I'm not going to read that. So the only other thing I'm going to say about I'm Not in Love is I just really love Vapid's backing vocals in this. It almost it used to be funny watching him doing it because it almost sounded like he was a robot. I'm not in love, love. He used to in the studio. I remember him. He's just really good at interpreting his music, and the look on his face goes along with it. So I think he's one of the best singers I know, and I think he allows himself to actually feel and actually physicalize what he's singing. So he was really funny. He looked just like a robot when he was in the recording room. It was hilarious. I just loved. I loved the recording of that song more than the song itself. So I'm going to go to Gub's second note here. Uh, NYC. So in New York City, we played the ABC No Rio big pole in the center of the stage. That's right. You can see videos online. They have videos of us playing at this place. It was actually an artists' commune sort of place in downtown Manhattan, and it had a big, huge pole in the middle of this stage. It wasn't even a stage. I think we just played around the pole, and the audience would be around us. We watched the van like hawks because there were dealers on every corner. It was a very sketchy neighborhood at the time. We stayed with the guys from Born Against. Um, I have so many memories of those guys that I can only do the highlights. We just love those guys so much. We stayed with them quite a few times in New Jersey. Um, and one of the things I remember is one of the guys was also a tattooist, and he had a couple pictures of people that he gave tattoos to on the refrigerator in their apartment. And there was one with a guy that had the word fuck cops tattooed onto his forehead. And I can't remember which one of Born Against, but he told us the story about that this guy wanted this tattoo, and he tried to talk him out of it, and he got this tattoo, and I guess went to prison. He had done something, and then once he was in prison, he got the shit beat out of him by all the cops. Whenever cops see him, he'd beat the shit out of him. I don't know if he got killed, but he definitely got his whooping for having "fuck cops" written on his forehead. Um, Born Against, we would also do a split EP with them because they had such a different audience, and we had such a different audience from them. They were more of a hardcore band. We were more of a pop punk band, but we just just loved each other so much. Like we loved playing with them, and they really loved playing with us. So Ben and the singer of that band thought it would be very interesting to actually just write for each other's audiences. So that's why we did the EP, and they wrote for each other the lyrics. The music, I think, was written by the band. So the Weasel would write. Ben wrote lyrics for Born Against, and they wrote lyrics for us. Also on that tour is where we had Johnny Puke with us. This was before he was in any other band. Um, he was doing a sort of a poetry tour with us on a few shows, and I remember us thinking that he was a little bit of a ridiculous guy. And I just have to say here that my opinion of him changed so radically after that tour, but even over time, he became one of my favorite guys that I would see on tour. And I'm very happy to say that he's still my friend after many, many years. But on that tour, he might have been a little annoying. But he was a scenester, and he hung out with Gigi Allen, so he sort of bordered on a little bit of trying to disgust the audience. I remember, I think at this show, maybe he drank someone's pee or someone peed in he peed into someone's mouth or someone peed into it was crazy. It was a crazy night in this place. Um, but there's a phrase that Gub says here that can't remember if we went to South Carolina on the leg, but I remember Vapid kept saying, "Let's ditch the puke," referring to Johnny Puke. So Vapid, I think, was a little turned off by him, but later they also became. I think everyone really became close to Johnny Puke. And he also sang Dingbat on a lot of the songs on that tour from Boogada Boogada record. Also, when going south, Gub didn't write about this, but we played at this daycare. I think it was on this tour, maybe an earlier one, but we played at a daycare in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And someone just wrote about it recently on my Facebook and reminded me of this, that we pulled in, we just got lost in this sort of forest in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we ended up pulling up to a daycare. And the mother of the kid who put on the show, it was a day, little kids daycare with little teeny slides and big wheels. And by the time we got there, all the punks with mohawks were like eating M&Ms out of bowls and riding on big wheels and playing games like Trouble and Sorry and Shoots and Ladders. It was a crazy, crazy day. And the show went really, it was really fun. But then we stayed over at the mother's. The mother invited us to their house. It was way out in the middle of nowhere, and she stayed up all night with us and made us pigs in a blanket food. Sausages and eggs and stuff, and pancakes, and we just ate all night. And I think she had a crush on maybe one of us or all of us. I can't remember exactly, but she also had a tanning bed in her room, and she was brown like scary, crispy brown. And her son even said that she had cancer, but she couldn't stop going into the tanning bed. So I always remember that. That was a pretty bizarre night. Um, Gub reminded me of that originally, and then someone mentioned it on my Facebook that he was actually at that show. So let's go into the next song we have is One Step Beyond. Um, This was one of my favorite on the record. For some reason, something about the song really still sticks with me till today. I think it's a standing on my head. I just like that image of standing, someone standing on your head or getting in your way or stopping you from doing something. And also, it was used on a record commercial. I mean, a commercial for a record store. Just a local record store. They didn't ask permission for us. I think they just used it. But I remember we knew the record store, and it was cool because we really liked them. But that reminded me that we actually had a song on a Best Buy ad for My Brain Hurts, where some punk kid says, "I listen to Screeching Weasel," and we got a lot of slack for that. But we didn't know anything about it. We were never asked. Never asked about it. We didn't know about it until people started, telling us about it in a really sort of accusatory punk fashion of selling out. Um, but we didn't get anything for it, and we didn't give them permission either. So, but back then we didn't know what giving permission for anything was anyway. I don't think they did either, and there was no like court or suing or anything. It just was this weird thing, and we got it caused us maybe more trouble than good. I don't know. I think some people maybe heard of a band because of that. The one thing I'll say about One Step Beyond is it starts with the solo guitar done by Vapid, and then I come in with the rhythm track. And like I said, I was trying to practice rhythm because I was just not very good at it, and I was trying to get better and better and better at it. So it was a challenge to me, and I really liked this challenge of trying to play the rhythm without any snare or drums behind it, just having to keep with the solo. And also, I had my Westone, which was a piece of junk guitar that I loved, but it had the volume things you could pull up on them, and it would create a different sound. I think it uses the pickups differently, but one was very tinty. And so this is the only song I've ever used that for was on this song, but I think it really adds a sort of a biting sound, but it had no bass. But I just really like the sound of my guitar on this song. I think it comes in really chunky and strong, and then I think you can really hear the strumming because of that weird thing I did with these volume knobs, whatever it does, pickup playing stuff, different, you know. The next one is I Was a High School Psychopath, written by Dan Vapid. Yes, great song. It's probably the most Ramonesy influenced song on this record, or any of our records, Screeching Weasel records. What I really like it features Ben and Vapid singing together. Like their voices are, even though Ben's is in the forefront, Vapid is almost singing the whole song along with them. The other thing I'll say is there's that chukka sound, between each da 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 chukka chukka dun dun dun. That was the thing that I sort of introduced into the band that I really always liked, and Vapid liked that sound too. We sort of, like I think I said on the other one, we had that sort of rock and roll, and this was the chukka chukka sound that we liked. I think I originally done it on Zombies on the Boogada Boogada record. So it's a really fun song to play. And then years and years later, if I'm not mistaken, I think we played this with the Mopes for the first Insubordination Fest, which was a great time. And I remember that Vapid and I decided that we wanted to play this song for that because it sounded a little bit like a Mopesy type song. So now I'll go back to Gub, number three. Gub, New Orleans. The show where I was super sick sleeping in the van. We played, and after we stopped, there was the girl who had an argument with her boyfriend, stole his car, and then crashed into a light pole. Yes, while we were in the venue, we heard this crazy noise going on outside, and then we walk out, and this woman in a car is yelling things out the window and just zooming by under this bypass, and there was like a four-way intersection, and she was just zooming by and hitting something like the road had sort of a hill in it or a bump, and she would just zoom over and zoom past, zoom back by, and then she hit another car. And then all her friends ran up to her, making sure she was okay, and no one went over to the car that she had hit. So I remember that me and Ben, maybe a few other of us, had actually gone over and say, "Fuck them! Let's make sure these people are okay." So that was a big event on the tour. And then Gub says, when asking someone next to me what was going on, they replied, "This happens all the time. Her last boyfriend, she set his house on fire." So that was madness. That was in New Orleans. If you read my book, you might the Weasels in a Box. You might find out more about this and who this woman was. I don't know if I feel comfortable about talking about it anymore, but I might bring it up again on Bark Like a Dog. But if you're very interested, you could look it up in my book, Weasels in a Box. Next song. Next song is Crying in My Beer. This is Vapid on the solo in the middle of it. I asked him to try to remember all the solos he had done because I thought Ben had actually done some of the solos. But Vapid says that it was just him and me doing the solos. And I know which ones I've done because there's a few of them. And it wasn't this one. So I really like the sound of this one. It's more of a, you know, almost like a chorus, a chord than a solo, one string solo. What I say about this, I wanted to talk a little bit about Joe Queer and Ben. Uh, they really just hit it off. So amazing, the two of them, the way they would work together on lyrics. And they just both have a great memory for remembering interesting phrases that they overhear and using them in songs, or some of them they created. Like Joe used to like to say that uh, he likes to be in the trenches with the troops, where he likes to tour in rough places because he likes to be in the trenches with the troops. Uh, and he's got the phrase "kicked out of the Webelos," and in the song "Love, Love, Love," which is my favorite song by the Queers. I remember when we played and met them for the first time. That song, it was great. It was an amazing song. And Joe will say that day that we played his house, he said on the podcast that I've done for Don't Back Down, he said that day changed his life because he was inspired by what we were doing, and we were of course inspired by what he had been doing previously. I think we had his demo tape, or Ben had his demo tape of what they had "Love, Love, Love," the song on it. So those two were always back and forth, inspiring each other, stealing from each other, using each other's lyrics. And the lyric "Crying in My Beer" actually is in the song "Love, Love, Love." So that was definitely inspired by hearing that phrase. Yep, that's that. So the next one is "Slow Motion." This one was written by Johnny Personality and Ben. Um, I didn't remember this at all, so I actually referred to Johnny Stockfish, or Johnny Personality, to write some notes on this. So I'm just going to read these. Uh, it says, "Slow Motion was a song I wrote called Galactic Man. Ben wrote a new title with different lyrics, but all the music was my contribution. I originally presented the song to you and Ben with a guitar and just singing the vocal melody, saying na 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 na, etc. I didn't bother singing my lyrics as I am not a lyricist by any stretch! Exclamation point. I remember the old studio too being behind. Oh, okay. Then he goes on with some other notes. Um, Let me see if I want to read these. Yeah, I'll read these now. Because I asked him what else he remembers, and he remembered the old studio too being behind a door factory. That it was Mass's factory. We'll learn more about that later. It was definitely a fun time for me, but I do remember everyone else, especially Ben, being pretty stressed. I was just glad and extremely grateful for the experience and to be along for the ride. Honored that you guys let me share the stage for the local Weasel shows as well as a spot in the mix of that record. Great guy. Johnny Personality has done amazing things, and the Vindictives. Maybe I'll give a little of his background here. He auditioned for me and Ben for Gorgor Girls during our breakup, and but he didn't get in, and it was more in the interview than his playing. He just wasn't really into touring, and we thought we might be a touring band at that time, so we just sort of kept him on our back burner. And then when Joe Vindictive needed a bass player that for the band that him and Ben had started, Vindictives, um, we called Johnny Personality in. So that's how he became part of that band. And then during that time, we actually had him come back and play in Weasel. But he did not like touring, so I don't know if we ever saw him as a permanent member. It seemed more like he was on loan to us. Uh, and then eventually Ben would go back to vocals, and we would go back to back to guitar, and we would go back to a four-piece. Um, so that's that. And then here we have number 7, Like a Parasite, written by Weasel and Joe King, like I had just said. I don't have much to say about this one. I think it's better as a queer song. I really do think this one veered almost too much into being a queer song. Uh, I even wrote here I used to get so bored playing this song. Like when we would play it live, it just seemed really predictable to me. The verse and the chorus and the bridge. The lyrics I went back and listened to, and they're of course they're funny as all get go, and they're a good metaphor. But overall, it just wasn't very an impressive song to me. It seemed like it belonged more into the queers camp than the Screeching Weasel camp. Now Gub, our one show down in Tampa with the Pink Lincolns at the sister club of the Masquerade. Ben got hit in the head with a beer can and walked off mid-set. I think Vapid walked off next and then you, and I remember Panic and I were still playing, looked at each other and motioned that's that, I guess. Yeah, I didn't remember what tour that was on, but that did happen. We were the Masquerades were really sort of these venues in Atlanta and in Tampa for mostly metal bands, but they would do some punk shows, and it was a huge cavernous place, and there weren't too many people there, and I think we were kind of miserable already, and someone threw a beer bottle and hit Ben, yeah, and then something else happened. Something hit someone's guitar, and then Ben he was didn't put up with any of that shit back in those days, and still today. He just walked off. A lot of the times, I think unjustifiably, but this one, it seemed to be a sort of sketchy and troublesome place. But I hesitated, so Vapid just went right with Ben, and then I sort of hung out there for a while, and then walked off, and then as Gub said, the two of them, Panic and Gub, decided that was that, and the music stopped, and the gig stopped. I think the Lincolns actually played after us, so yeah, that was that. And Chris is still our friend, so we'd had a lot of great shows with him over the days, so I don't think that was a pretty big deal to him at all. Yes. And now we're on. Oh, we're on side 2. Side 2, Joanie Loves Johnny. This has a lot of great feels to it for me. This is where, I got to sit back, do rhythm. Actually, I do the solo on this one, I think, right? No, is there a solo on this one? I'm going to listen to it now to make sure. See how I haven't done any of these songs in so long? I'm going to listen to this. Yeah, Yeah, that's me playing that solo, guys. Yeah, I really like that one actually. There's a couple of them that sound pretty similar. But that is me on the solo on the Joanie Loves Johnny song. Um, but what I was saying is the whole beginning, Joanie and Johnny sitting in a tree, is sort of that little kids sort of making fun of each other. And Vapid and Ben used to love that stuff. I think the song was created first, and then once we started playing it, I think it was quiet over that beginning, that sort of instrumental start. And I think those two just started goofing around, and they came up with the whole Joni and Johnny sitting in a tree. Um, I would say a bit to the theme of this. Once again, it's hits on the Happy Days and the whole Brady Bunch stuff. Our first big song, "Murder in the Brady House." This is the same sort of idea of, but taking it to the Happy Days where things are going wrong with Joni and Chachi, and someone named Johnny gets involved. I think he would used to always nod to me occasionally that he was using my name as me for that. And then, yes, and he had a big thing about, I think, Scott Baio, because eventually, no, not eventually, he would use, before this, he would use the solo from Charles in Charge, which was a Scott Baio TV show, too. So it's the same thing, it's basically chaos in the world of Happy Days, like the chaos in the world of Brady Bunch years prior to that. And once again, those are just Vapid and Ben. It's so much fun to hear those two sing together. They had such a good time. They ended up living together too. I don't know if it was before this or after this, but the next song is Second Floor East. This is where Ben introduces the phrase "Anthem for a New Tomorrow," which becomes, the next record. Uh, what I like about this is another one that has an instrumental at the beginning where me and Vapid, what I like about it, listening to it again, is that we're not doing anything too difficult or exciting, really. But we could really, I just really liked how our guitars would play against each other, and we sort of there's moments in this beginning thing where you have time to hit at a different rhythm, and it seems like such a small thing, but to me, it really fills out that sound. Um, so I think that beginning is really kind of cool. Really simple, but we're playing with the octaves. We're playing with slightly different rhythms from each other. Um, and then it kicks in with Vapid. So Vapid kicks that one in, and this is very similar to Hanging Around, where I actually would kick in with the rhythm under Ben, and in this one we switched it, and Vapid kicked in with the rhythm under Ben. Um, Now I'm going to go on to Automatic Rejector. It says written by Screeching Weasel. Now we were in rehearsal. I think Ben had already left maybe for this one. Uh, yes, he had already walked out or he was coming in. I can't remember if it was the beginning or end of rehearsal, but Vapid started playing this rhythm, this sort of very new wavy or more like pop music, back then like that he really loves too. And then I remember started doing this solo over that, and then we just started grooving on this thing, and Panic and Personality started playing along, and he came up with the phrase "automatic rejector," and I remember just looking at his face, screaming into the microphone, and he's just trying to, he was doing those sort of 80s new wave bands sort of jerking around, and it's super hilarious. And he just, it's my simple, stretch the string and hold this, two notes, stretching sort of uh, Johnny Be Good sort of thing I was doing. Um, but I really think that song's a lot of fun. But that was created um, in rehearsal when Ben was out of the room, and then he came back either that day or the other day, and we showed it to him, and he came up with the lyrics for it based on a title by Vapid. I just remember we laughed so hard at that rehearsal. It was so much fun. Now here's my last Gub note. All in all, I remember an unbelievable response to sold out shows. Great people. The van was always a sanctuary. Very quiet. Ben always reading. You mostly my co-pilot. Vapid cracking jokes and Panic always laughing. Always seemed like there were no arguments and everyone got along. That's pretty true for that tour. Also, I'll say that Gub was a trooper with the driving. He did so much of the driving. And basically, I think he drove us home overnight from Massachusetts to Chicago or somewhere around there. It was about a 12-hour drive, 10 or 12-hour drive, and he did the whole thing. He was wired. We were a little worried at times, like near the end, he was just crazy, crazy. Like if you if you ever meet Gub or if you know Gub, he's like an alien from another planet, but the most lovable, fatherly alien that you'll ever meet. So next is Jeannie's got a problem with her uterus, number 11. My sister is named Genie, and she always wondered whether this song was supposed to be about her because, from what we know, she doesn't have any trouble with her uterus. But Ben also used to live at my house for a while, and they used to get along all right. But now I'll have to say that a lot of the anger that I should be maybe holding, or the hostility towards Ben and the whole situation of our sort of falling out, she tends to hold that for me. She has nothing but venom towards Mr. Weasel. And I think that's how, in many ways, I'm able to just deal with it a little bit more passively because it's she's just she you can see the red hot coals in her eyes when she talks about him. She's like a pit bull, I put here. Also, I wanted to say that prior we did a demo tape with a couple of these songs from this record and a couple other songs for Steve Albini. It's the only time we ever worked with Albini. We recorded "Danny is a Wimp," which is a take on the queer song "Tulu is a Wimp," I think. And then we did "Going Home," which was co-written by Aaron Comet Bus from Crimshine. And then we did "Jeannie Has a Problem with Her Uterus" and "Crying in My Beer." It was also produced by Eric Spicer, who kind of just sat there. We just wanted him in there because he had in Chicago, we sort of admired him. He was the Naked Ray Gun drummer. And we met him because he was the manager of the Kinkos on Belmont in Chicago that Brian Verman worked at. So I think he had that hookup for us. And he's a great guy. I got to interview him fairly recently for my podcast, and he said he would do it. So him and Steve Albini, two great Chicago names, were on that. The weird choice that Steve Albini made is he made my guitar like really, really loud. So my guitar is the most loud thing on there, even louder than vocals and stuff. It's crazy. I don't know why he did that. I by far I don't think it's the best guitar sounding, but I think there's something raw that he likes. He tends to like a sort of raw sounding guitars, so maybe that appealed to him. But that's whenever I listen to it, I'm like, wow, my guitar is stupid loud. So you can there's a track. I'm not going to talk about it, but on Wiggle, one of the tracks from that is "Going Home" is on here. I think also "Danny's a Wimp" is on this Wiggle, the CD release. Now I'm going to talk from Mass. So Mass Giorgini wrote, the album was recorded in the original Sonic Iguana Studios location, which was in the back of a wholesale door company, like Personality said. He managed it for years. The space was horrible, as the rooms were all square and only 7 feet high. Although on the plus side, there were many rooms which we were able to take advantage of. So we would put amps in different rooms, and he had 2 different vocal rooms, which will come into place in this next sentence. I had just received a large diaphragm condenser mic in time for the session, and when I set it up for Vapid, complete with pop filter, Vapid could not seem to resist singing Metallica's "Nothing Else Matters" over and over while I was getting levels. That seemed to irritate Ben, who said he should have known better than to let me set Vapid up in a separate isolation room. Once again, I just cannot say enough about Vapid. And just how great of a singer is, but also how he sort of emulates things and imitates things very well. He was doing that Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was doing songs from Red Hot Chili Peppers and Metallica in the booth, and I thought it was hilarious. But Ben thought it was hilarious too, but he would also get really angry at him because he was having a tough time with his vocals already, Ben. So I think it was sort of causing a little conflict in how much fun Vapid was having in the booth. Now we will go on to "Sad Little Girl." This was written by Weasel, Vapid, and Personality. No, I don't. That's a little unfair to me, I think, because I actually worked on this one too. It was another one where where we started when I think we were just goofing around, and Vapid started playing this weird type of 80s sort of riff that sounded like Devo, because we were all fans of Devo too, like the Girl You Want. It sort of sounds like the Girl You Want from Devo. Uh, and I think then Personality wrote the bridge to it, and then I think this is one of the ones where Ben actually did walk in on it and sort of liked it, even though it was nothing else like the rest of the record. Um, we were sort of going in a few other different directions, it seems, on this record, which I think eventually just wasn't pleasant to Ben at all. But this was definitely one of the departures, and it just came from us goofing around, and then Ben overhearing it and going, "Hey, let's do something with that." Yes. And now I'll go on to another mass here. Yes. What is this? Because a lot of my fault. I allowed Ben. Oh no, that's something I wanted to read at the end here. So the mix session was a fiasco. Is that where I want to do now? Yes. Okay. Let's read this now. The mix session was a fiasco, says Massimiliano Giorgini. Massimiliano Giorgini. I would mix a song which would eventually be approved after cassette tape of the mix had made its way from Lafayette to Chicago and to all concerned parties. However, after mixing a few more tunes, changes would be requested to the original song, often fundamental changes that would affect the entire setup. In other words, changes that would technically require a full remix. Um, what I'm going to put in here is that this is what paused the record in its release. Everything about this was hard for us. A lot of tension, and besides the rehearsals were a lot of fun, but the actual recording was very difficult. For us, it was like our second record. I think it felt like a new band, and this was our you know our record after the smashing "My Brain Hurts." And I think there was a lot of pressure on Ben to write melodic songs and to make it, and yet that sort of rebellious part of you that wants to make it different sounding. So I think he was dealing with that conflict. He also wanted to become more of a singer. It always had bothered him that he didn't think he was a singer. He could hear how something should sound in his head, but he couldn't get it out right. And so I don't think he was ever really very happy with his nasally, whiny voice. And so this record went back and forth with him trying to be more aggressive with his voice or try to be more melodic with his voice. And ultimately, I think he just got confused in what he wanted and kept on re-recording it over and over again. Um, and I think he went for the more aggressive singing on this, but I think probably felt like he wanted to sing more melodically, more like a singer. So Mass goes on to say, for young engineers, this may sound like a minor issue, this mixing, remixing all the time, since one can copy and paste settings across mix setups on different songs. Nowadays, it's all digital. However, this was 1992, and all the mixes were analog on analog desks. There were no re-edits or edit undos. It was all hardware, and an invisible turn of just one of the 400 knobs involved in the mix could change everything dramatically. And what I remember about that too is because we also recorded the Ramones around this time, and that was a lot of fun because that was just done in one night. But there were songs where there were four of us on all of the mixers, turning them up and down simultaneously, like because we were doing it all live, live mixing to the tape. So I understand exactly what Mass is talking about. Small changes sometimes cause him to have to start over and over again. And we would sit in Ben's living room and listen to these, and it's got to the point, where you start analyzing so much that you just can't get out of it. It's like an abyss you fall into. The more you analyze, the more things you hear that are wrong, the more. And we weren't even in Lafayette, we were in Chicago, so this was all done through mailing cassettes back and forth to each other. So by the time Mass would get something done, we'd undo it. It was a mess, and it took months to come out. So I definitely know what Mass is talking about there. So number 13, Ain't Got No Sense. This is a teenage head song. What I want to say about this is, once again, solo by Vapid, great solo. All I say about this is that me and Ben I think before this, we went to school together in a Harper, in a what do you call those? Two semester colleges. What do they call that? Junior college. That's what it is. Harper. Went to Harper and Palatine, and we were just neither of us were going to school at the time. So this was before I started going to Columbia. So we started taking these classes, one in poetry and one in music. Yes, musical theory and poetry class. And he tried to commit to being more of a an astute student, but and we were actually good students. I think in the class, I think we participated. But I think we walked out of that going, it was more of a bonding experience between the two of us and actually learning anything. But we used to always listen in his Chevy Malibu. We used to always drive there and back, listening to our biggest records were the Ramones, "It's Alive" record, the Forgotten Rebels, and another Canadian band, Teenage Head. So this had always been in his head to do a cover. And we used to always eat at the Dairy Queen too. I wrote that down too. Every day, well, it was twice a week, but every time we went to class, we would come home, listen to those bands, and eat at the Dairy Queen. Now, my last one for Mass, it says here, it was a real mixing nightmare that did not help mitigate some real technical issues. Of course, a lot of it is my fault. I allowed Ben a great deal of control as the client. In later years, I would have had a stronger grip on many elements and only relinquished control in areas that were of real artistic import and not allow myself to be swayed in technically essential matters. We all sort of look back at that original mix, and it just got out of hand. And to me, today, to this day, I can't even listen to the record itself, the vinyl, because there's these high end cymbal sounds that we all missed that just are so loud that it kind of annoys all of us. So when it was re-released, we had Mass remix all of it so that we could actually listen to it. So I'm happy to say that I can listen to this one now because it's one of my favorites. The last song, it's all in my head. Now I start the song with and it, like I say, it's really tense rhythm because I'm just trying to stay in rhythm, and it's pretty fast. So that I think it creates this sort of a emergency feeling it gives to it, like this. It's really energetic and on the seat of your pants, about to lose your mind, which kind of I think fits the idea of it's all in my head. And Vapid plays this simple yet perfect sounding solo that's just a repetition, slightly changing occasionally. I really love it. Ben was always very frustrated with his singing on this record, as I've said before. He would go in the booth, sing, and then quit, and then come back and sing it differently. He came up with this second vocal line that goes in the background of this song. Um, so it's basically his main vocal is more of his growly voice, and he just didn't know what he wanted in the background. And Vapid, I think, tried a few things and wasn't very happy with it. So he went in, he wrote some lines down, and created this whole other verse basically on top of the verse, um, where he gets to sing. So in this song, you sort of get to see the more rough voice of Ben and the singing voice of Ben, of the conflict he was going on, I think, between the two in this record. And I remembered when I was there listening to him sing that for the first time, I was like, "That's how does a line like that just come out of his head like that?" It seemed so perfectly not the same, but fit in the song at the same time. If you listen to it, you'll know what I mean. And then Johnny Personality does "It's All in My Head." He comes in on the back of that song. Um, I think that's all I'm going to say for this. Um, yeah, I often say it's one of my favorite records. I think listening to these over again, it's sort of changing. Anthem for a New Tomorrow, which was a lot of people's favorite, was not one of my favorites, but I just gave a gander at it for the one that I am doing next time, and I might be liking it more and more. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and let's see if I release this or not. This is John Jughead signing off at 1:30. That was almost an hour. Thank you. And next up will be either the Ramones or I don't think so. I think I'll jump straight to Anthem for a New Tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.